Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defender and watched the last Allied ships disappear into hyperspace. The blue flashes of light faded one by one until only human vessels remained in the dark void of space. His hands gripped the metal railing as he stared at the tactical display showing empty sectors where thousands of alien ships had been just moments before. The Zephyrian fleet had been the first to leave. Their sleek silver ships had simply vanished without even a farewell message. The Corvan battle cruisers followed next, their massive dark hulls disappearing into the swirling vortex of hyperspace. The Aldorian transport ships had fled before anyone could even ask them to stay. Even the Vorthan Republic, humanity's oldest allies in the galaxy, had recalled their entire fleet during the night. Lieutenant Ben Hughes looked up from his communications station with worry written across his young face. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission from Admiral Lisa Carter aboard the UES Liberty." Morrison nodded and gestured toward the main screen. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the weathered face of Admiral Carter. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her blue eyes held the weight of impossible decisions. Behind her, the bridge of the Liberty buzzed with activity as crew members worked at their stations. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Carter speaking." Her voice carried clearly through the communication system. "As of 0800 hours this morning, the Galactic Council has officially withdrawn all support for Operation Starshield. Every allied race has abandoned the defense of the Outer Rim colonies." Captain Susan Wright stepped forward from her position at the tactical station. Her dark hair had streaks of premature gray from years of deep space service. "Admiral, what about the civilian evacuation ships we were promised?" Carter's expression grew darker. "The Aldorian Transport Guild has refused to honor their contracts. They claim the danger is too great for their civilian crews. The hegemony has declared the Outer Rim colonies strategically insignificant and not worth defending. Even the Vorthan Republic has recalled their diplomatic vessels." Morrison felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The Outer Rim contained 47 human colonies spread across dozens of star systems. 3 billion people called those worlds home. They were farmers, miners, researchers, and families who had left Earth to build new lives among the stars. Now they faced annihilation, and the galaxy had turned its back on them. "Sir," Lieutenant Amy Foster called from her sensor station, "long-range scanners are detecting the Devourer fleet. They're moving through the Kepler system and destroying everything in their path." The Devourers were unlike any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. They were machines, cold and calculating, that consumed entire star systems to fuel their endless expansion. Their ships were dark, angular things that seemed to absorb light itself. They showed no mercy, made no negotiations, and left nothing behind but empty space where worlds had once existed. Morrison turned to face his crew. Each person on the bridge represented the best of humanity. They had trained for years, fought countless battles, and sworn oaths to protect human colonies throughout the galaxy. Now they faced an enemy that outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. With no hope of victory. How long before they reached the first colony world? Morrison asked. Foster checked her instruments again. "Based on their current speed, the Devourers will reach New Colorado in 72 hours. New Colorado was home to 500,000 people. Most were miners who had spent decades digging rare minerals from the planet's crust. They had families, children who had never seen Earth, and dreams of a future that would never come if the Devourers reached them." Carter's voice cut through the silence. "The Galactic Council has issued new orders. All human forces are to withdraw immediately to the core systems. We are to abandon the Outer Rim colonies and establish a defensive line around Earth and the inner worlds." Captain Wright's hands clenched into fists. "They want us to just leave them? 3 billion people?" "The Council believes the Outer Rim cannot be defended," Carter replied. "They consider the colonies acceptable losses in exchange for protecting the more populated inner systems." Morrison looked around the bridge at his crew. Lieutenant Hughes had served with him for 5 years and had never backed down from a fight. Foster had grown up on one of the Outer Rim worlds before joining the fleet. Even the newest crew member, Ensign Paul Mason, had family living in the colonies. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Morrison asked quietly. Carter stared directly into the camera, her eyes filled with determination. "The Council expects us to abandon our people and run. They have written off the Outer Rim as lost before we even try to fight." She paused, and her voice grew stronger. "But we are not the Council, we are human, and humans do not abandon their own." Morrison felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. He knew what Carter was suggesting. The human fleet consisted of less than 200 ships against a Devourer armada of over 2,000 vessels. The odds were impossible, the mission was suicide, and success seemed hopeless, but those were human colonies out there. Those were human families who would die if no one stood between them and the Devourers. The galaxy might have abandoned them, but humanity would not. "All ships," Carter continued, "are to proceed immediately to the Outer Rim. We will evacuate as many civilians as possible and delay the Devourer advance. We cannot defeat them, but we can buy time for our people to escape." Wright looked at Morrison with concern. "Sir, the crew should know what they're volunteering for." Morrison turned to address his bridge crew. "You heard the Admiral. We're going to fight an enemy we cannot defeat to save people we might not be able to reach. Anyone who wants to transfer to a ship heading back to Earth has my permission to do so." The bridge fell silent for a long moment. Then Hughes spoke up from his station. "With respect, sir, I joined the fleet to protect human colonies. That's exactly what we're going to do." Foster nodded agreement. "My family came from New Colorado originally. I'm not leaving them to face this alone." One by one, every crew member on the bridge voiced their commitment to the mission. Morrison felt a mixture of pride and sadness. These people were about to sacrifice everything for a hopeless cause, and they were doing it without hesitation. Carter's image flickered slightly as the transmission quality wavered. "All ships, prepare for immediate departure. We jump to hyperspace in 1 hour. Remember, we're not going there to win. We're going there to save lives." The screen went dark, leaving Morrison alone with his thoughts and his crew. Outside the viewports, the other human ships were already beginning to move into formation. Small lights flickered across their hulls as crews prepared for what might be their final mission. Morrison walked over to the tactical display and studied the projected path of the Devourer fleet. They were moving methodically from system to system, consuming everything in their path. The human colonies lay directly in their route like helpless prey waiting for a predator. "Sir," Wright said quietly, "do you really think we can save them?" Morrison looked at her honest face and saw the same doubt that gnawed at his own heart. "I don't know, Susan, but we have to try. If we don't, who will?" The ship's intercom crackled to life. "All hands, this is the captain. We are departing for the Outer Rim colonies to assist in civilian evacuation. This will be dangerous, and some of us may not return. But we go because it is right, and because they are our people." As the UES Defender jumped into hyperspace, Morrison made himself a promise. Whatever happened in the coming battle, humanity would not go quietly into the void. They would fight, they would sacrifice, and they would show the galaxy what it meant to stand together. When everything else fell apart, the stars stretched into lines of light as the ship entered hyperspace, carrying them toward a battle they could not win but would not avoid. Behind them, the galaxy watched and waited. Ahead of them, 3 billion human lives hung in the balance. Morrison gripped the railing tighter and prepared for war. The first battle came at New Colorado exactly 72 hours after the human fleet had jumped into hyperspace. Captain Ryan Bell stood on the bridge of the U's Valiant and watched the Devourer fleet emerge from the swirling vortex of space. The enemy ships materialized one by one like dark shadows against the stars, their angular hulls crackling with energy that seemed to devour the light around them. Bell had fought in dozens of battles during his 20-year career, but he had never seen anything like this. The Devourer vessels moved with mechanical precision, forming perfect attack formations as they advanced toward New Colorado. Their ships were massive, some the size of small cities, and they radiated a cold malevolence that made his skin crawl. "Sir, I count 215 enemy vessels," reported Lieutenant Steve Palmer from the tactical station. His voice remained steady despite the fear that Bell could see in his eyes. "They're advancing in 3 waves with heavy cruisers leading the assault." Bell looked at his own force displayed on the tactical screen. 12 destroyers, 6 cruisers, and 2 battleships. 47 ships total against over 200 Devourer vessels. The odds were impossible, but that was not why they were here. "All ships, this is Captain Bell," he spoke into the communication system. "Remember, we are not here to win this battle. We are here to buy time for the evacuation transports. Every minute we hold them back is another 1,000 civilians who reach safety." On the planet below, the evacuation was proceeding frantically. Massive transport ships were loading families, children, and essential personnel as quickly as possible. The miners who had spent decades digging precious metals from New Colorado's crust were abandoning their homes with only what they could carry. Parents held crying babies while older children clutched toy spaceships and looked up at the sky with confusion. The Devourer fleet continued its advance, their weapons beginning to charge with an ominous red glow. Bell had studied their attack patterns during the journey to New Colorado. The Devourers always targeted the largest ships first, then worked their way down to smaller vessels. They showed no mercy and took no prisoners. "Engineering, prepare for emergency power routing," Bell ordered. "I want everything we have available for weapons and shields. Life support to minimum, artificial gravity to half power." Commander Lisa Santos, Bell's second-in-command, moved to stand beside him. She had served with Bell for 8 years and had never seen him back down from a fight. "Sir, should we try to contact them? Maybe we can negotiate some kind of delay?" Bell shook his head grimly. "The Devourers don't negotiate, Lisa. They don't communicate. They just consume everything in their path and move on to the next target." The first Devourer weapons fired, sending beams of crimson energy across the void. The UES Defender, one of the smaller destroyers, took a direct hit to its forward shields. The energy barrier flickered and collapsed, leaving the ship vulnerable to the next attack. "All ships, engage the enemy," Bell commanded. "Target their scout ships first. Make them work for every meter of space." The human fleet opened fire, their weapons creating brilliant flashes of light in the darkness. Blue plasma bolts and energy beams struck the Devourer vessels, but their shields absorbed most of the damage. The enemy ships were heavily armored and designed for prolonged combat. The UES Courage, commanded by Captain Maria Santos, found itself surrounded by 3 Devourer cruisers. The enemy ships moved with mechanical precision, coordinating their attacks to overwhelm the human vessels. "Defenses. Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, reported Santos's tactical officer. "We're losing life support on the lower levels." Santos gripped her command chair as the ship shuddered under another impact. Through the viewport, she could see the evacuation transports still lifting off from New Colorado's surface. Hundreds of them were rising into the atmosphere, carrying precious human cargo to safety. "Transfer all remaining power to the engines," Santos ordered. "Set collision course for that command ship." Her crew looked at her with understanding. They knew what she was asking of them. The Courage was dying, but its death could still serve a purpose. If they could take out the Devourer command vessel, it might disrupt their coordination long enough for more transports to escape. "All hands, this is the captain," Santos announced over the ship's intercom. "Prepare for ramming speed. It has been an honor to serve with you." The Courage's engines roared to life, pushing the damaged vessel toward the largest Devourer ship. Enemy fire concentrated on the approaching human vessel, but Santos held course. The ship's hull began to glow red-hot from the energy impacts. But still, it continued forward. Their collision was spectacular. The Courage struck the Devourer command ship at full speed, both vessels exploding in a brilliant flash that lit up the entire battlefield. The destruction of their command vessel caused the other Devourer ships to hesitate for precious seconds. Their coordination disrupted. In those seconds, 3 more evacuation transports cleared the planet's atmosphere and jumped to hyperspace. Santos and her crew had traded their lives for 3,000 more civilians who would live to see another day. The battle continued for 6 more hours. One by one, the human ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. The U's defender lasted until the end, its Captain Jake Morrison fighting desperately to buy time for the final evacuation shuttles. "Sir, we're the last ship remaining," reported Lieutenant Ben Hughes. "The Devourers are converging on our position." Morrison looked at the tactical display showing dozens of enemy ships closing in. On the planet below, the last evacuation transport was lifting off with the final group of civilians. They had saved 400,000 lives, but 60,000 people had been left behind. "All power to engines," Morrison ordered. "Take us away from the planet, make them follow us." The UES Defender limped away from New Colorado, drawing the Devourer fleet away from the helpless civilians still on the surface. Morrison knew his ship would not survive much longer, but every minute they spent chasing him was another minute those people had to hide or find some other way to escape. The final transmission from New Colorado came from Dr. Helen Ross, the planetary administrator. Her voice crackled through the communication system as the Devourers landed on the planet's surface. "This is New Colorado to any human vessels. We want you to know that we understand why you came. You gave us hope when no one else would. Most of our people are safe because of your sacrifice. Thank you." The transmission ended as the Devourer machines began their work, consuming everything on the planet's surface. Within hours, New Colorado would be nothing but empty rock drifting in space. Morrison's ship finally succumbed to the combined fire of a dozen Devourer vessels. As the UES Defender broke apart around him, Morrison felt a mixture of sadness and pride. They had lost the battle, but they had saved 400,000 lives. For a human, that was victory enough. News of the battle at New Colorado spread quickly through the galaxy. The other races watched in amazement as humanity had fought against impossible odds to save their people. The Zephyrians, who had been among the first to abandon the colonies, began to question their decision. In the halls of the Galactic Council, representatives from dozens of species watched the battle recordings in stunned silence. The Corvan ambassador, a massive being with 4 arms and chitinous armor, spoke first. "They knew they could not win," he said slowly. "They knew they would die, but they fought anyway." The Aldorian representative, her blue skin shimmering in the chamber's light, nodded agreement. Their transport guild refused to help evacuate those people, but the humans died to save them. Even the Vorthan Republic, humanity's former allies, began to reconsider their position. The images of human ships sacrificing themselves to buy time for civilian transports had spread across their networks. Public opinion was shifting, and politicians were facing difficult questions about why they had abandoned their human allies, but the war was far from over. The Devourer fleet was already moving toward the next target, and humanity's forces were stretched thin across dozens of systems. The galaxy might be starting to pay attention, but attention alone would not save the remaining colonies. In the depths of space, Admiral Carter received reports from the battle at New Colorado. 47 ships had been reduced to 3 survivors, and thousands of good people were dead. But 400,000 civilians were alive and safe in the core systems. "Prepare the fleet for the next engagement," Carter ordered. "We have 36 more colonies to evacuate." The war continued, and humanity fought on alone. 3 weeks after the battle at New Colorado, Admiral Lisa Carter stood in the war room aboard the UES Liberty and stared at the tactical display showing the advance of the Devourer fleet. Red markers indicated systems that had already fallen. Yellow showed planets under immediate threat, and green marked the colonies that still had time for evacuation. The green markers were becoming fewer each day. Carter had lost 60 ships in the past 3 weeks, along with over 8,000 crew members. The Devourers seemed unstoppable, methodically consuming one system after another. But humanity had managed to evacuate over 2 million civilians, people who would have died if no one had stood between them and the machine fleet. Admiral, called Lieutenant Colonel Danny Clark from across the room, we're receiving distress signals from Haven Valley. The research station there was missed during the initial evacuation. Carter looked at the display showing Haven Valley, a small agricultural world on the edge of the outer rim. The planet was barely inhabited, except for a single research facility that studied new crops for the expanding colonies. In the chaos of the evacuation, the 50 researchers and their families had been forgotten. How long before the Devourers reached that system? Carter asked. 18 hours, ma'am, Clark replied. But there's a Devourer patrol fleet already in the area. They're focused on the main colony, but they'll detect any large rescue operation. Carter studied the tactical situation. Haven Valley was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by systems that had already fallen to the Devourers. Any rescue mission would be extremely dangerous, and the chances of success were low. But 50 people were trapped there, including 23 children who had been born on the research station. "Get me Commander Alex Torres," Carter ordered. "Tell him I have a mission for his task force." Commander Torres had been leading hit-and-run attacks against Devourer supply lines for the past week. His small force consisted of 4 destroyers and a squadron of fighters. They specialized in quick strikes that avoided direct confrontation. With the main enemy fleet. Torres appeared on the communication screen within minutes. His face was tired and marked with the stress of constant combat, but his eyes remained determined. Behind him, the bridge of the UES Ranger showed the controlled chaos of a ship preparing for battle. "Admiral, we're ready for deployment," Torres reported. "What do you need us to do?" Carter explained the situation at Haven Valley. Torres listened carefully, occasionally glancing at his tactical officer, who was calculating the odds of success. When Carter finished, Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Ma'am, that's a suicide mission," he said finally. "The Devourers have 3 patrol ships in that system, and we'd have to get past them to reach the research station. Even if we succeed, we might not make it out." Carter nodded grimly. "I know, Alex, but there are 50 people there, including children. I can't order you to go, but I can't abandon them either." Torres looked around his bridge at his crew. These were people who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions in the war. They had already proven their courage dozens of times, but this would be their greatest test. "How many people did you say were at the station?" Torres asked. 50 researchers and their families, mostly children. Torres made his decision. "We'll go, Admiral. But if we don't make it back, make sure people know why we went." The mission launched 2 hours later. Torres led his 4 destroyers toward Haven Valley, while his fighter squadron, commanded by Lieutenant Casey Johnson, provided reconnaissance. Johnson was one of the best pilots in the fleet, a young woman who had grown up on a mining colony and understood what it meant to be forgotten by the galaxy. "Commander, I'm detecting 3 Devourer patrol ships near the main colony," Johnson reported from her fighter. "They're concentrating on the population centers and don't seem to be monitoring the research station." Torres studied his tactical display. The research station was on the far side of Haven Valley, isolated from the main settlements. If they could approach from the system's edge and stay close to the planet's surface, they might avoid detection long enough to load the civilians. "All ships, this is Torres. We go in fast and quiet. No unnecessary communication, no active scanning. We land, load everyone we can, and get out before the Devourers know we're there." The approach to Haven Valley took 4 hours. Torres kept his ships at low power, drifting through the outer system like debris. The Devourer patrol ships continued their systematic destruction of the main colony. Their attention focused on the larger population centers. Dr. Helen Ross was working in the research station's laboratory when the first human ship appeared in the sky. She had been trying to maintain normal operations despite knowing that death was approaching. The children at the station needed routine and stability, even if they would not live to see tomorrow. "Dr. Ross, there are ships landing outside," called her assistant, Dr. Mike Foster. "They're human vessels." Ross ran to the observation deck and saw 4 destroyers settling onto the landing field. Soldiers in combat armor were already disembarking, moving with practiced efficiency. She recognized the uniform markings of the human fleet and felt a surge of hope she had not experienced in weeks. Commander Torres met her at the station's main entrance. His face was grim but determined, and she could see the weight of command in his eyes. Dr. Ross on Commander Torres. "We're here to evacuate your people. How many are we taking?" 53 total, Ross replied quickly. 47 adults and 6 children under the age of 12. We have essential research data that needs to be preserved. Torres nodded. "Load the research data if you can, but people come first. We have maybe 30 minutes before the Devourers detect us." The evacuation proceeded with military precision. Families were loaded onto the transport ships while soldiers secured the perimeter. The children were frightened but quiet, sensing the urgency of the situation. Ross watched as decades of research were abandoned, but she felt no regret. The knowledge was important, but the lives of her people mattered more. Lieutenant Johnson circled overhead in her fighter, watching for signs of Devourer activity. The enemy patrol ships were still focused on the main colony, but she knew that would change soon. The human ships on the ground were too large to hide for long. "Commander, I'm detecting movement from the Devourer patrol fleet," Johnson reported. "They're turning toward our position." Torres looked at the loading operation. 2/3 of the civilians were aboard the ships, but the process was taking longer than expected. The youngest children were scared and crying, slowing down the boarding process. "How much time do we have?" Torres asked. 5 minutes, maybe less, Johnson replied. "They're sending fighters to investigate." Torres made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "All ships, prepare for immediate departure. Load everyone you can in the next 2 minutes, then we leave." The last civilians were hurried aboard the transport ships as the first Devourer fighters appeared. In the sky, Torres watched 6-year-old Amy Chun, the daughter of one of the researchers, climb the boarding ramp with her stuffed animal clutched in her arms. She looked back at him with wide, trusting eyes. "Thank you for coming for us," Dr. Ross said as she boarded the last transport. "We thought everyone had forgotten we existed." Torres felt the weight of her words. "We don't leave people behind, Doctor. That's what makes us human." The Devourer fighters screamed out of the clouds just as the human ships lifted off. Johnson and her squadron moved to intercept them, their fighters dancing through the air in deadly combat. Plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossed the sky as the two forces clashed. "All pilots, this is Johnson. Buy time for the transports to escape, whatever it takes." One by one, Johnson's fighters fell to the superior numbers of the Devourer force. Each pilot fought until their ship was destroyed, knowing that every second they delayed the enemy gave the civilians a better chance of survival. Johnson's fighter was the last to fall. As her ship spiraled toward the ground, she transmitted a final message to Torres. "Tell my family I died protecting children. That's enough for me." The transport ships jumped to hyperspace just as the Devourer patrol fleet arrived in force. Torres looked back at the system as it disappeared behind them, knowing that brave people had died to save the lives of 53 civilians. Dr. Ross found Torres in the transport's passenger compartment an hour later. The children were sleeping, now exhausted by the stress of the evacuation. Amy Chun was curled up in her seat, still clutching her stuffed animal. "Why did you do this?" Ross asked quietly. "Why did you risk everything for us?" Torres looked at the sleeping children and thought about Lieutenant Johnson and her squadron. Good people had died today, but these children would live to grow up and maybe have children of their own. "Because you're human," he said simply, "and humans don't leave each other behind." Word of the Haven Valley rescue spread through the galaxy like wildfire. The story of human soldiers dying to save 53 researchers and their children captured the imagination of species that had thought humans were simply stubborn fools. The Zephyrian Empire began to question their decision to abandon the colonies, and even the Corvan hegemony started to reconsider their position, but the war continued, and humanity fought on alone. Each battle cost more lives, but each rescue operation saved more people. The galaxy was beginning. 12 months had passed since the war began when the first alien ship appeared alongside the human evacuation fleet at New Berlin. Captain Danny Clark was commanding the rescue operation from the bridge of the UES Phoenix when his communications officer suddenly looked up with confusion written across her face. "Sir, we have 12 ships dropping out of hyperspace," reported Lieutenant Corinne White. "They're not devourers and they're not ours either." Clark moved to the tactical display and watched as sleek silver vessels materialized in space around New Berlin. The ships had the elegant curves and blue energy signatures of the Zephyrian Empire, the same race that had been among the first to abandon the human colonies weeks earlier. "Are they hostile?" Clark asked, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapons control. "No, sir," White replied, checking her instruments. "They're broadcasting on standard diplomatic channels. The lead ship is requesting permission to join the evacuation." Clark stared at the display in disbelief. The Zephyrians had left human space without even saying goodbye, leaving millions of people to face the Devourers alone. Now they were returning, just as the situation looked hopeless. "Put me through to Admiral Carter," Clark ordered. "She needs to know about this." Carter's image appeared on the communication screen within minutes. Behind her, the bridge of the UES Liberty showed the constant activity of a fleet at war. The Admiral looked tired but alert, her gray hair showing the stress of weeks of impossible decisions. "Admiral, we have Zephyrian ships here at New Berlin," Clark reported. 12 vessels requesting permission to assist with the evacuation. Carter's eyebrows rose in surprise. "What are their intentions, Captain?" Before Clark could respond, another voice cut through the communication system. The universal translator rendered the alien words into clear English, though the mechanical tone could not hide the emotion behind them. "This is Fleet Commander Zeltar of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy," the voice said. "We request permission to assist in the evacuation of New Berlin." Carter appeared on the main screen of Clark's bridge, her expression cautious but curious. "Commander Zeltar, your people withdrew from this conflict weeks ago. Why are you here now?" There was a pause. Before Zeltar responded, the Zephyrian ships maintained their position, making no aggressive moves but clearly prepared to help if permitted. "Admiral Carter, we have been watching your people fight for 67 days, Zeltar said slowly. "We have seen your ships die to save civilians who cannot defend themselves. We have watched you sacrifice everything for people you barely know. This is not something we understand, but it is something we have come to respect." Clark looked at his crew, seeing the same mixture of hope and suspicion that he felt. The Zephyrians had advanced technology and powerful ships, but they had also proven they could not be trusted when things became difficult. "What do you want in return?" Carter asked, her voice carrying the wariness of someone who had been betrayed before. "Nothing," Zeltar replied immediately. "We ask for no territory, no payment, no political advantage. We have realized that honor cannot be measured in profit or safety. Your people have shown us what true courage looks like." The communication channel fell silent for a long moment. Clark could see Carter weighing the risks and benefits of accepting alien help. The Zephyrian ships were powerful enough to make a real difference in the evacuation, but trusting them was another matter entirely. "Very well, Commander Zeltar," Carter said finally. "You may assist with the evacuation, but understand that if you betray us again, there will be consequences." "We understand, Admiral. We will not fail you again." The evacuation of New Berlin proceeded faster than anyone had expected. The Zephyrian ships worked alongside their human counterparts, loading civilians and coordinating defensive positions. Commander Zeltar's vessel, the Star of Zephyr, took position next to Clark's ship as they covered the final transport runs. "Captain Clark," Zeltar's voice came through the communication system, "may I ask you a question?" Clark nodded, though he knew the alien could not see him. "Go ahead, Commander." "Why do you do this?" "Your people fight battles you cannot win to save lives that will not change the outcome of the war. From a tactical perspective, it makes no sense." Clark thought about the question for a moment. He looked around his bridge at the crew members, who had volunteered for this mission knowing they might not survive? He thought about the families below who were being lifted to safety while Devourer scouts moved closer to the system. Because they're people, Commander, Clark said simply. They have names and families and dreams. We don't abandon people just because saving them is difficult. But you gain nothing from this sacrifice, Zeltar persisted. Your ships are destroyed, your crews die, and the war continues regardless, Clark smiled grimly. We gain something. You can't put on a tactical display, Commander. We gain the knowledge that we did the right thing. When this war is over, if any of us survive, we'll know that we stood up when it mattered. The conversation was interrupted by urgent signals from the sensor stations. 3 Devourer scout ships had entered the system and were moving toward New Berlin. The evacuation was nearly complete, but the last transport was still loading civilians from the planet's surface. All ships prepare for combat, Clark ordered. Protect that transport until it clears the atmosphere. The human and Zephyrian ships moved into defensive formation as the Devourer scouts approached. Clark had fought these enemies dozens of times and knew their capabilities. 3 scout ships could destroy his entire force if they were not careful. The battle was brief but intense. The Zephyrian ships proved their worth, their advanced shields and weapons matching well against the Devourer technology. When one of Clark's destroyers took critical damage, Zeltar's ship immediately moved to protect it, drawing enemy fire and allowing the human crew to escape, but it was what happened next that truly changed everything. During the fight, the Star of Zephyr suffered a massive hull breach that knocked out their life support systems. The ship was dying, and Zeltar's crew had minutes before the atmosphere was completely gone. Clark watched the tactical display and made an instant decision. All power to life support, he ordered. Transfer our remaining atmospheric reserves to the Zephyrian ship. Sir, his engineering officer protested, if we do that, we won't have enough life support for our own crew. If we take damage, Clark looked at the man steadily. Those are our allies out there, Chief. We don't abandon allies. The transfer of life support took precious minutes during which Clark's ship was vulnerable to attack. The Devourer scouts concentrated their fire on the UES Phoenix, sensing weakness. Hull breaches appeared across multiple decks and several crew members were killed by explosive decompression, but the Zephyrian crew survived. When rescue ships arrived 6 hours later, they found both vessels drifting in space with their crews alive but unconscious from oxygen deprivation. Clark had kept his crew conscious just long enough to ensure the transfer was complete, then passed out at his command station. When Clark regained consciousness 12 hours later, he found Commander Zeltar waiting beside his medical bed. The Zephyrian's blue skin had taken on a pale tint that Clark's medical training told him indicated serious stress. Captain Clark, Zeltar said quietly, my crew owes you their lives. You could have let us die and saved your own people, but you chose to risk everything for us. Clark tried to sit up but found his body too weak. You were fighting beside us, Commander. That made you one of us. Zeltar was quiet for a long moment. My people have a saying, honor is not given, it is earned through actions that cost more than they gain. We thought we understood this, but we were wrong. Your people have shown us what true honor looks like. Word of the battle at New Berlin spread through the galaxy faster than hyperspace travel. The story of human crews risking their lives to save alien allies captured the attention of every major species. The Corvan hegemony, known for their practical approach to warfare, began sending medical ships to assist with civilian care. The Aldorian Transport Guild reversed their decision and began honoring their evacuation contracts again, refusing to accept payment for their services. Even the normally isolationist Vorthan Republic dispatched a battle group to assist with colony defense. Their ambassador to the Galactic Council made a public statement that was broadcast across hundreds of worlds. The humans have reminded us why we formed this alliance in the first place, the Vorthan representative declared. We came together, not for profit or territory, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In abandoning the humans, we abandoned our own principles. But perhaps the most significant change came from within the Zephyrian Empire itself. Fleet Commander Zeltar's report to the Imperial Council became required reading in their military academies. The story of Captain Clark's sacrifice spread through their society, changing how they viewed courage and honor. These humans, Zeltar reported to the Zephyrian High Council, would rather die than abandon those who fight beside them. They measure victory not in territory gained or enemies destroyed, but in lives saved and promises kept. How can we call ourselves an advanced civilization if we do less? The war was far from over, and the final battle came at Terra Nova, the last major colony world in the Outer Rim and home to 8 million human civilians. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of the UES Enterprise and watched the largest fleet in galactic history assemble around the planet. Ships from dozens of species filled the space around Terra Nova, their different designs and energy signatures, creating a spectacular display of unity. Carter had been fighting this war for 4 months, watching her fleet shrink with each battle. While the Devourer Armada grew stronger, she had expected to make her final stand alone with whatever human ships remained operational. Instead, she found herself commanding a force that represented every major civilization in the galaxy. "Admiral," reported Communications Officer Lieutenant Jenny White, "we're receiving final positioning reports from all Allied fleets. The Zephyrian Empire has deployed their entire Second Fleet. The Corvan Hegemony sent 3 battle groups. Even the Tau Confederation has arrived with reinforcements." Carter studied the tactical display showing over 2,000 Allied ships arranged in defensive formations around Terra Nova. Zephyrian vessels flew alongside human destroyers in perfect coordination. Kovan battle cruisers shared sensor data with Aldorian fighters. The Vorthan Republic had positioned their most advanced ships as the primary defense line. "What's the status of the Devourer fleet?" Carter asked. Lieutenant White checked her instruments. "Long-range sensors detect over 1,500 enemy vessels approaching from 3 directions. They'll arrive in approximately 6 hours." Carter nodded grimly. The odds were better than any battle humanity had fought since the war began, but the Devourers were still formidable enemies. Their ships were designed specifically for conquest and destruction. While many of the Allied vessels were primarily built for exploration or trade, communication request came through from Zephyrian Fleet Commander Zeltar aboard the Star of Zephyr. His image appeared on the main screen, showing the bridge of his ship where Zephyrian and human officers worked side by side. "Admiral Carter," Zeltar said formally, "the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet is ready for battle. We await your orders." Carter felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders. She was about to lead the largest military force in galactic history into a battle that would determine the fate of billions of people. The irony was not lost on her that humanity, which had been abandoned by these same allies months earlier, was now commanding their fleets. "All ships, this is Admiral Carter," she announced on the fleet-wide communication channel. "Today we fight not as separate species, but as one people defending our home. The Devourers have shown us what happens when we stand divided. Now we show them what we can accomplish when we stand together." Captain Pete Wilson, commanding the UES Defiant, found himself assigned to fight alongside Commander Zeltar's ship. Wilson had been skeptical of alien assistance after months of fighting alone, but the Zephyrians had proven themselves in dozens of battles over the past weeks. "Commander Wilson," Zeltar's voice came through the communication system, "my tactical officer suggests we coordinate our attack patterns. Your ship's weapons complement our defensive capabilities perfectly." Wilson looked at his tactical display showing the 2 ships' combined firepower. The Zephyrian vessel had stronger shields and more advanced sensors, while his destroyer carried heavier weapons and better armor. Together, they could handle threats that would destroy either ship alone. "Agreed, Commander," Wilson replied. "We'll follow your lead on defensive maneuvers. You follow ours on attack runs." As the 2 fleets prepared for battle, smaller conversations were taking place throughout the Allied forces. Kovan engineers shared technical specifications with human mechanics. Eldorian pilots compared tactics with Vorthan squadron leaders. Old prejudices and misunderstandings were set aside in the face of a common enemy. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly on schedule, their dark ships materializing against the stars like a plague of metal locusts. The enemy vessels moved with their characteristic mechanical precision, forming attack formations as they advanced toward Terra Nova. "All ships, the enemy is in range," Carter announced. "Engage at will." The battle began with a massive exchange of fire that lit up space with energy beams and plasma bolts. The Allied fleet opened fire first, concentrating their attacks on the Devourer command ships. The enemy responded with their own weapons, sending crimson beams of destruction toward the defending forces. The first hour of battle went better than anyone had expected. The combined firepower of the Allied fleet was overwhelming individual Devourer ships, and their coordinated tactics were proving effective against the enemy's mechanical strategies. But the Devourers adapted quickly, concentrating their forces and targeting the largest Allied vessels. Captain Maria Santos, now commanding the UES Courage II after her original ship had been destroyed months earlier, found herself in the thick of the fighting. Her ship was part of a mixed squadron that included Corvan cruisers and Aldorian fighters, and their coordination was saving lives throughout the battle. "Captain, the Corvan ship Hammer of War is taking heavy damage," reported her tactical officer. "Their shields are down and they're losing atmosphere." Santos made an instant decision. "All power to forward shields. Move us between the Hammer and those Devourer ships. Cover their retreat." The Courage II positioned itself to protect the damaged Corvan vessel, absorbing fire that would have destroyed the alien ship. Santos watched her own shields weaken under the assault, but the Corvan ship managed to withdraw to safety. "Captain Santos," came a transmission from the Corvan commander, "you have saved my crew. We are in your debt." "No debt between allies," Santos replied simply. "Just return the favor when we need it." The battle continued for hours, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Ships were destroyed on both sides, but the Allied fleets' superior numbers and coordination were beginning to tell. The Devourers found themselves unable to break through the defensive formations around Terra Nova, but then something changed on the enemy side. The largest Devourer ship, a massive vessel the size of a small moon, broke away from the main battle and headed directly toward Terra Nova's surface. The ship was too large for the planetary defenses to stop, and if it reached the planet, 8,000,000 civilians would die. "All ships, we have a priority target," Carter announced. "That command ship cannot reach the planet." Wilson and Zeltar were among the first to respond, their ships racing to intercept the massive Devourer vessel. But they were not alone. Ships from every allied species followed them toward what looked like certain death, the Devourer command. Ships' weapons were devastating. The first wave of Allied ships was destroyed before they could even return fire. The second wave managed to damage the enemy's shields, but paid a terrible price in lives and vessels. Carter watched the tactical display and realized that conventional tactics would not work. The command ship was too large and too well defended. Only a desperate sacrifice could stop it from reaching Terra Nova. "All ships, this is Admiral Carter," she announced on the fleet-wide channel. "I'm ordering the Enterprise on a collision course with that command ship. All other vessels are to withdraw to minimum safe distance." But as the Enterprise began its final approach, Carter found herself joined by ships from every Allied fleet. Zeltar's Star of Zephyr moved into formation beside her. The Corvan dreadnought Unbreakable took position on her other side. Vorthan, Aldorian, and Tau ships followed, all heading toward the same destination. "Admiral Carter," came a transmission from the Galactic Council itself, "you have shown us that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Today we all stand as one." The combined sacrifice of over 50 Allied ships, including their most experienced commanders, destroyed the Devourer command vessel in a brilliant explosion that could be seen from Terra Nova's surface. The loss of their command ship caused the remaining Devourer fleet to lose coordination, their mechanical precision breaking down into chaos. The Allied fleet pressed their advantage, destroying the confused and leaderless enemy ships one by one. Within hours, the Devourer threat was ended forever, their fleet scattered or destroyed. The galaxy was safe, but the cost had been enormous. Captain Wilson found himself one of the senior, surviving officers as the Allied fleet regrouped around Terra Nova. Ships limped back to the planet with damaged hulls and wounded crews, but they carried the knowledge that they had won the most important battle in galactic history. 6 months later, Wilson stood in the newly constructed Alliance Hall on Terra Nova, watching representatives from across the galaxy sign the Terra Nova Accords. The building had been designed jointly by all the races who had fought in the war, a symbol of their unity forged in battle. Ambassador Karen Hughes, representing humanity, approached the podium to address the assembled delegates. Her words would be broadcast to billions of people across hundreds of worlds. When every race abandoned us, we said we would fight alone, Hughes began. But we learned something important in the darkness between the stars. We are strongest not when we stand alone, but when we stand together. The bonds forged in battle will last forever because they were built on sacrifice and mutual respect.